Good morning, Moray Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Chagigah, and we are on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. We are continuing the exceptions that the Mishnah discuss for people who have to come to Azara 3 times a year, and people who don't have to come, exceptions to the rule. The Gemara mentioned that we learn from the mitzvah of Hakhel, once in 7 years, when people come to Yerushalayim at the end of Shnat HaShemitah in Chag HaSukkot, and there, that year is not just the Shalosh Regalim when you come for Sukkot to Yerushalayim to Azara, but it's also a mitzvah of Hakhel. So that overlap is something that we learn some of the halachot of Re'iyah, of the 3 times of Shalosh Regalim from the mitzvah of Hakhel. So one thing that we learned so far was that the person that is cheresh, hamedaber ve'eno shomea, or shomea ve'eno medaber, is going to be excluded, and the learning is from mitzvah of Hakhel. Because in Hakhel it says, Le'ma'an yishmeu, ulma'an yilmedu. So that's pretty clear that if you can't hear, you're going to be excluded from Hakhel. Now, even though that we mentioned, based on the Mishnah in Terumot, that an individual that could hear or could talk, that means he's not deaf-mute. He's not both. Someone that's both is considered like shoteh, doesn't have proper development of brain. But if someone is one but not the other, is only deaf, or is only mute, this is like an intellectual individual, like any other person, and he's got to be hayav the mitzvot. He's obligated to keep all of the mitzvot. So therefore, says the Gemara, I would have thought he also should be obligated 3 times a year to go to Yerushalayim. The Gemara says no. Even though that he has to do all the other mitzvot in the Torah, but he is absolved, he's patur, from going up to Yerushalayim. Why? Because of this pasuk that is said about Hakhel. Lema'an yishmeu ulma'an yilmedu. In order that they should learn, and they should hear, and they should learn. So Leman Yishmeu is clear. We got stuck a little bit on Leman Yilmedu. Leman Yishmeu, all of us here would agree, means they should hear. So a deaf person is patur. That's no-brainer. Leman Yilmedu, says the Gemara, somebody that can't talk, can't hear. That's basically what the Gemara seems to be suggesting. So of course, someone that can talk can't learn. If someone can't talk, the Gemara seems to suggest they can't learn. The Gemara is going to, of course, jump on the obvious problem. If you can't talk, you can't learn. Why is that? Says the Gemara. Take a look at 11 lines down. The Gemara says, that is coming to exclude someone that can hear but cannot talk. And in fact, the Gemara asks a question. You want to suggest that if a person cannot talk, he can't learn? There were 2 famous ilemim. There were 2 famous mute individuals. The Habu Beshevuvute, the Rabbi. They lived in the neighborhood of Rabbi. Bnei Bratet Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada. They were the grandchildren of Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada. The Yerushalmi says Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada's children were all chareshim. They all had a genetic defect. And this is, of course, no surprise based on that. Says the Gemara, Ve'amri labna chated Rabbi Yochanan. The kol emat dava aili Rabbi lebe midrasha. Every time that Rabbi would go to Bet Midrash to teach, these 2 mute people would go after him and sit in front of him in the Bet Midrash. They would go and sit in front of him. And they would nod as he would teach, they would nod with their heads. Right? As I said, when you have a student sitting in front of the rabbi and nodding his head, sometimes he means that he's understanding everything. And sometimes it means he's understanding nothing. He's just nodding his head. So nobody knew this. People felt bad for them. They couldn't talk every time they come there. The whole day they're sitting there nodding their head. So Rabbi felt bad and he davened for them. If you Nasi davens for you, what happens? Whatever he davened is going to happen. It says the Gemara, they will move their lips, and no one would know. What people will feel bad for them. Rabbi davened for them, and lo and behold, they were healed. And they started talking. And turns out that they know all the Shulchan Aruch, all the halachot, the Safra, the Sifri, all the Midrashei halacha, the Kol Talmud, they knew Shas. They knew everything that they had learned, they knew it. So how in the world are you going to say that someone that can't talk, can't learn? Look at these people. So that's impossible. Amar Morzutra said, Kari beh leman yelamedu. It's not leman yilmedu. It's leman yelamedu. In order to teach, they have to hear and they have to teach. I mean, obviously, this is also reminiscent of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that says, Halomed al menad lelamed. Like part of the mitzvah of teaching is not lilmod, just al menad lilmod. It's the Mishnah has two parts. Lilmod al menad lelamed, lilmod al menad la'asot. That's the only two options. Well, part of the learning is teaching. So they're coming there, don't read leman yishmeu ulman yilmedu, but leman yishmeu ulman yelamedu, which is the same exact wording as yilmedu, right? The writing is the same. But now yelamedu, and someone that can't talk, can't teach. Now you see, in the next line of the Gemara, that's even more profound than that, but that's what the Gemara says now. Rav Ashi says, you don't even need the story of these two mute guys to know that this is what the drasha has to be. In other words, Rav Ashi says, wow, it seems like you brought this story from these two mute people. I say, well, a person that's mute could learn, so therefore we're stuck. No. The actual pasuk itself is clearly not talking about learning, but coming to teach you that you have to be able to talk by teaching. How do I know that from the pasuk without this story that we just brought? Says Rav Ashi, Vaday leman yelamedu. It's pashut, it's for sure that's coming to tell you that you have to be able to teach, and the correct drasha would be leman yelamedu. If it's coming to, if you want to think that this is leman yilmedu, that they're coming to learn, if you want to say that this is coming to tell you that they have to be able to talk, to learn, then you don't need them to be talking to be learning. From lo yishmeu, leman yishmeu, you know that they have to learn. In other words, like this. When the pasuk says leman yishmeu, says once in 7 years, all of the Jews, anashim, v'nashim v'taf, men, women, and children, they have to come to Yisraeli. Why? Leman yishmeu. What does that mean, leman yishmeu? In order to hear? No, it's in order to learn. To listen, to learn. That's what it is. So the learning I already know from the Man Yishmu. Otherwise, why are they coming? To listen? To listen to do what? The listening is in order to learn. So the fact that they have to be able to learn, I know from the first part of the pasuk, Leman Yishmu. Once you told me Leman Yishmu, I don't need to tell you Leman Yilmedu. So why in the world is the pasuk telling me leman yishmeu ulman yilmedu? What does that mean? Al korchach, you have to say, is coming to tell you, Leman yelamedu. So says Rav Ashi, I don't need your story about the two Ilamim. It is muchach mineu be. Within the same pasuk, the drasha is clear. That's not just mere learning that we are concerned about. It's more than just learning. Learning you learn from Leman Yishmu, that they should be able to hear. Leman Yilmedu is more than just hearing. Is Leman Yelamedu, you have to be able to speak it out. You have to be able to connect it with people, communicate it with people. Therefore, I know talking from Leman Yilmedu. So be that as it may, now we learned that by Shalosh Regalim, if you could speak, but you can't talk, but you can't hear. If you could hear, but you can't talk, both of those, you're patur. Where do we learn that from? Even though that this person is considered kepikeach lechol davar, he's considered a smart and intellectual individual, still is patur, and we learn it from mitzvah of hakel, once in 7 years, right? That's our Gemara so far. Amar Rab Tanchum. Now, Rab Tanchum has, we're going to learn 3 different things from Rab Tanchum over here, so keep counting. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Tanchum, Cheresh bo'ozno achat, patur min hariyah. If a person is deaf only in one ear, well, if I would ask everybody around all these tables over here, they would say, well, if you hear from one ear, that's good enough. Says Rab Tanchum, no. If you're cheresh bo'ozno achat, deaf in one ear and in the other ear you hear perfectly, still patur from going to Yerushalayim 3 times a year. Why? Shenemar be'oznehem. Another learning that we learn from Hakel, from once in 7 years. What's the full pasuk? The full pasuk reads, "Bebo kol Yisrael leraot et penei Hashem Elokecha, b'makom asher yivchar, tikra et haTorah." So the king would sit there in Azarat, Malchei David, and he would read the Torah from Dvarim, portions of Dvarim. Says the Gemara, "Neged kol Yisrael be'oznehem." In front of all the Jewish nation, be'oznehem, in their ears. Says the Gemara, v'hai be'oznehem, mi'baile be'oznehem de'kulu Yisrael. So the Gemara's initial drasha, the Gemara understood is because it says be'oznehem, it doesn't say be'oznam. It says be'oznehem, which is plural forms. It is plural form. So therefore, it has to be both ears working. That's the drasha. The Gemara's basic. Step back. When it says be'oznehem and you translate the pasuk, it says the king sits there and reads the Torah in the ears of all the Jews. It's not one person, it's all the Jews. So each one, even if they have one ear, that would be still be'oznehem because there's many ears that you're reading this to. So the simple understanding the pasuk means that you're reading it in the plural form ears. And you would say be'oznehem anyways. So what's your proof that you need every individual to have 2 ears working? Says, well, no, you didn't understand what I'm saying. I didn't mean that. That's pashut. It's more sophisticated than the drasha. Says the Gemara, Hahumi neged kol Yisrael nafka. The fact that you have to have all of the Jews and them listening, I don't need to say be'oznehem. Let me read to you the pasuk again. Says the pasuk, Tikra et Torah azot neged kol Yisrael, and stop there. Read the Torah, this Torah, the Sefer Torah, neged kol Yisrael, in front of all the Jews. I would already know that all of them are there. Why in the world do you have to say be'oznehem as the last word in the pasuk? That's superfluous and redundant. Why are you saying that? It must be that's coming to teach you that every one of neged kol Yisrael, every one of those Jews that are standing in front of you, you need both of their ears. Be'oznehem of each one of them. Be'oznehem shel kol echad ve'echad. So says the Gemara, Imi neged kol Yisrael, havamina afar gav, delo shami, katav rachmana be'oznehem. Vehu de shami. So says the Gemara, no. The Gemara pushes back. He says, no. If he would say, neged kol Yisrael, and he would drop the word be'oznehem, I would say, well, you should read it in front of them, even though that they can't hear you. Right? So therefore, it's come to say them that they have to actually be able to hear. But how do you know they have to have 2 ears working? Maybe one is sufficient. Says the Gemara, no. The fact that they have to be able to hear, I already know from the last drasha of the Gemara. You remember? They should come, anashim, benashim, betaf, man, woman, and children. Leman yishmeu. We said that already. That they have to hear you. So deaf people, I know that deaf people are patur. So why? Back to our question: why do you need be'oz dehem? The word be'oz dehem is still superfluous. Therefore, says the Gemara, is coming. This is Rab Tanchum's drasha that you need both of every single individual's ears to work. If they are blemished in their ears, they're patur from the mitzvah. The Amar Rab Tanchum, second drasha of Rab Tanchum. This was a deaf person in one ear, now a lame person in one foot. A person that's missing or is lame or missing a foot is patur min hareiyah. He's also patur from going up. Why? Shenemar shalosh regalim. Regalim is like raglaim, right? And that means regel means 1 foot. Regalim means foots. Shalosh regalim, the drasha is you have to have 2 foot to go, 2 feet to go to Yerushalayim, like 2 legs. Says the Gemara, Veha regalim ibaile prat lebale kavin. Says the Gemara, wait a second. That's taken. That word, the regalim, that you want to make drasha. So let me give a little bit of a hakdama. Shalosh regalim means 3 times. But also, the way it's worded comes from regel because they would go up with their foot. They would go on feet to Yerushalayim. They would go on foot. So says the Gemara, we are going to darshin and explain why in the world does it say shalosh regalim, plural form must be that you have to have both of your legs working, right? Gemara says, wait a second. That I already darshin for a different drasha. And the question is, if a person has prosthetics, if he has a fake foot, a person that his foot was amputated, and he could still walk, but it's bale kavin, right? What's that? Peg leg, right? Whatever you call it. Back then they had it much less sophisticated. Now it's much more sophisticated. But is he patur or chayav to go? And says the Gemara, we darshin from shalosh regalim that person that's ba'ale kavin is patur. Mibaile prat leba'ale kavin, that even though that you have prosthetics, even if you have peg legs, fake foot, you still are patur to walk, but you're patur from going up there. So says the Gemara, no. Hahu mipamim nafka. That we learn from pa'amim. You don't need shalosh regalim for a person with prosthetics. That we learn from pa'amim. Now, haktama to this, just like shalosh regalim means 3 times and also means foot, the other, interestingly enough, the other meaning of 3 times also means feet. Shalosh pe'amim, which means literally translated as 3 times, but pam also means steps, footsteps, as the Gemara is going to explain. So Gemara says, wait a second. We have this pasuk mentioned, as we said in the beginning, 3 times. Shalosh regalim b'shana, shalosh pa'amim. The Gemara says, we already learned that a person with fake foot, with prosthetics, is patur from shalosh pe'amim. So the regalim is empty. We haven't darshaned anything yet, and hence we're going to darshan from it that you have to have 2 feet working. It's not just 1. So says the Gemara, mi pa'amim nafka. The Tanya, we learned in Braita, pa'amim and pa'amim ela regalim. Pa'am doesn't just mean 3 times, but it means a footstep. as I will prove to you from 2 psukim in Tanakh, says the Gemara. V'chen hu omer, as the pasuk says, Tirmasna ragel, ragle ani pa'ameh dalim. Right? Which clearly indicates, the pasuk in Yeshayahu, that the foot of the foot, ragel, Tirmasna is going to step over it, ragle ani, the steps of an ani, pa'ameh dalim, the footsteps of a downtrodden. So you see, pa means footstep. Another pasuk in Shir Hashirim, it says, "Ma'yafu ba'amayich b'ne'alim bat nadiv." How beautiful are your footsteps, b'ne'alim, in the shoes, bat nadiv, the daughter of Nadiv. Right? So we're going to explain this pasuk in a moment. Says the Gemara. From here you see that a person that has a problem in one foot, Chiger braglo achat, said Rav Tanchum, is patur from coming to shalosh regalim. That's the second drasha of Rav Tanchum. But once you're at it, the Gemara says, Darash Rava, mai tichtiv ma yafu pa'amayich b'ne'alim bat nadiv. This pasuk from Shir Hashirim that we just mentioned, in I think it's in Perek Zayin, right? Perek Zayin pasuk bet, says the Gemara, what is the meaning of bat nadiv ma yafu pa'amay? How beautiful are your footsteps? We know that Shir Hashirim is all mishalim, are all references to the love that we have for Hashem, Hashem has for us, right? Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Akiva said, Kol shirim kodesh, Shir Hashirim kodesh kodashim. Shir Hashirim is the holy of holies, is the explanation of the beautiful love that there exists between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and vice versa. So what does it mean? What is this referring to? Ma yafu pa'amayich b'ne'alim. How beautiful are your footsteps in shoes, bat nadiv. What is it talking about? Says the Gemara. Kama narin raglein shel Yisrael. How beautiful are the footsteps of Klal Yisrael. B'sha'ah she'olin laregel. When they go out of their comfort zone and they go to regel, shalosh regalim. They go 3 times a year to Yerushalayim. Bat Nadiv. What's Bat Nadiv? Bito, we are considered the daughters of Avraham Avinu shenikra Nadiv, that he was called a Nadiv Lev, someone that initiated a relationship. We say Nadiv, someone that donates. That we're talking about, but Mishkan right now, building of the Mishkan, the Parashiyot, and it's all Nidvata Mishkan. You have to voluntarily want to give money. There's no obligation aside from the Machzah Shekel and so on. It's Nadvut. It's the volunteer, and we volunteered for Avraham Avinu was the first one to become. It was Tchila Legerim. The Gemara is going to say. Says the Gemara, Shenemar Nedivei Amim. How do I know that Nadiv is Avraham Avinu? Shenemar Nedivei Amim Ne'esafu Am Elokei Avraham. That Nedivei Amim were all gathered together. Am Elokei Avraham. The nation of Elokei Avraham, which is a reference to us. The Gemara says, wait a second. Since when we are called just Elokei Avraham, what happened with Yitzchak and Yaakov? Well, they're the main ones. So what happened with them? Says the Gemara, Elokei Avraham and Elokei Yitzchak and Yaakov. What happened with Yitzchak and Yaakov over here? Now we just had the Gemara not long ago that Yaakov is the main one. He learned Derech Eretz from the fact that we called Bnei Yaakov. The end of the Gemara, Masachet Brachot, says the Gemara, Ela Elokei Avraham Shayat Tchila Legerim. We are called Nedivim because Avraham Avinu was a Nadiv. Why was he a Nadiv? Because he was Tchila Legerim. He was the beginning of all the Gerim. Now, what does that mean? Avraham was Tchila Legerim. Why is it? The people think mistakenly that Avraham Avinu was the first one that believed in Hashem. Wrong. Avraham Avinu went to his sons, went to Yeshiva Hashem Be'ever. There was yeshivot back then. Of course, there were people who believed in Hashem. Absolutely wrong to say Avraham Avinu was the first one that believed in Hashem. That's for sure off the chart. So what does it mean that he was Tchila Legerim? Right? So one simple understanding is that Avraham Avinu, and I think that's the simple understanding, based on Rambam in Chod Avodah Zarah, Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel. After Rambam explaining in long Halacha Aleph and Bet, the history of Avodah Zarah, how people veered off the path of Emunah to Hashem in the Dor Enosh and so on, and they started attributing power to certain elements of nature as intermediaries between them and God, and then they forgot about the Hashem part of it. They just started worshiping fire and moons and moon and sun and so on and so forth. Then he says Abraham Avinu was the first one. Basically, he says Abraham Avinu, from his own knowledge, he started wondering and pondering that this cannot be the God, that can't be. And in process of elimination, he got to the fact, he concluded that the world has to have a manhig. And he believed in Hashem from the power of his own emunah, not from teachings of anyone else. Shem ve'ever was elsewhere. They were sitting in the Bet Midrash. If you wanted to teach them, to learn from them, they would teach you once you entered the yeshiva. They didn't proselytize, they didn't go out. Avraham Avinu had no connection, no exposure to anything of monotheist belief. His father, his grandfather, his surroundings, his uncles, his second cousins once removed, everyone was Oved Avodah Zarah. But he himself, so that's the Chilal Gerim. He became from one emunah to another emunah, and he reached to that from his own conviction. That's one. Rashi over here, if you take a look, I think is answering this kushasimuya, this unasked question. She says he was given the mitzvah of, is the first one that was given the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Just like a ger, there's a whole guy, the ger has to accept the mitzvot, of course, has to get Brit Milah and has to do tefillah, right? The time of Hamikdash, they would also have to bring a korban, right? But the Brit Milah is part of the gerut. And Avraham Avinu was the first one that was given the mitzvah of Brit Milah. So you see that the initiation of gerut was started from him. And others in the Rishonim explained that Avraham Avinu was the first one that proselytized the emunah of Hashem to other people. Like Maran Kesef Mishneh writes on Rambam, the difference between Avraham Avinu and Shem ve'ever. Why Avraham was chosen? Shem ve'ever were there. Actually, Khatam Sofer, he has a beautiful, beautiful kuntras in the beginning of his Hakdama to his Tshuvot Ani Yoredah, Pituchei Chotam. There he writes that Shem ve'ever were bigger than Abraham, right? We don't think like that. But he says Pashut is they were bigger than Abraham. Because you see, when his own daughter-in-law had a question, didn't go to him, went to Shem ve'ever. They were bigger Nevi'im than Avraham Avinu. So why was Avraham chosen? And Maran Khatam Sofer says the same thing as Maran Shulchan Aruch in Kesef Mishneh, says because Avraham Avinu took responsibility for other people and went out of his comfort zone to teach it and to proselytize it to people, to bring the emunah of Hashem to others. So that's the Chilal Gerim, that he started bringing people Tachat Kanfei HaShekhinah, bringing people under the fold of Judaism, not Judaism, but monotheist faith. And that's why it's called Chilal Gerim. So when we speak about our relationship with Hashem as a nidava, as something that we don't have to do, and we do it as to love and as care, we relate that relationship to Avraham Avinu, who on his own didn't just figure out monotheist faith and come to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but once he believed in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he took responsibility for all of humanity, that he should bring that emunah to every single person. And that's why Hashem said, you're Av Hamon Goyim, you're the father of humanity, because you took responsibility for everyone. Hashem said, am I going to hide from Abraham for like doing my word? It's not my word, it's my word with him. It's like we're partners over here. So that's a tremendous thing about Avraham Avinu, and that's what the Gemara says over here. Amar Rav Kan. Now that we learned two different teachings from Rav Tanchum, a person that's deaf in one ear, a person that's chiger beregel echad, another teaching from Rav Tanchum. My dichtiv, unrelated, seemingly. Va'abor rek em bo mayim. By Yosef, when the brothers wanted to get rid of him, they wanted to kill him. Reuben said, "Don't kill him, throw him in the pit." And they did listen. They threw him in the pit. The Gemara says, the pasuk over there explains, Habor rek, the pit was empty, and bomayim, there's no water in it. So says the Gemara, If the pasuk would only tell me they threw Yosef in this pit, and the pit was empty, wouldn't everybody here know that there's no water in the pit? Usually, what do you have in a bore, in a well? Usually, what do you have? Water. So if I tell you it's empty, means it's empty from water. So why in the world does the Torah was so stingy and careful in spending words will tell me en bo mayim, there's no water in? Either tell me habor en bo mayim or tell me habor rek. You certainly don't need to tell me both, says Rav Tanchum. So why in the world is it telling me both? It's coming to tell you mayim en bo. There's no water there, but there were other stuff there. What do you usually have in a pit when you don't have water? Nechashim v'akrabim, snakes and scorpions that were there, right? Which is a whole discussion by itself. Reuben perhaps wanted to save Yosef. He didn't want to kill Yosef. So the Ardoros Mufashim will say, well, Reuben pointed to another one that didn't have any dangerous stuff in there. They ended up throwing in a different pit. And this stands in seeming contrast with the different Gemara. The Gemara says in Sotah, other places, that if you see somebody falling into a pit of Nechashim v'Akravim, of snakes and scorpions, is even worse than seeing someone fall into the enclosure of Arayot, of lions, because that you have a chance that maybe they'll eat him, maybe they won't eat him. But if somebody you see falling into a pit full of Nechashim v'Akravim, if you could go and testify in the Bedin that they're dead and their wife could get remarried, right? So how to reconcile that with the story of Yosef is a fascinating talk, not for now, it's a cliffhanger. So says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Maaseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. This is now, the rest of it is more agadic, and there's a lot to be talked about this story. So we started. Tana Rabbanan, Maaseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, Rabbi Elazar ben Chasma. These two individuals, they went to see Rabbi Yehoshua, first wide line, in Peki'in. Amar Lahem, he asked them, said, I couldn't make it to Bet Midrash today. What did they teach in the Bet Midrash? Right? So says the Gemara, Amru lo talmidecha anu memecha anu shotim. They said, it can't be. We are coming to learn from you. You're our Rebbe. We drink your waters. We learn your Torah. We're not here to teach, to say something over. We're here to learn. Amar Lahem, he said, correct. Afal piken, but even so, it's impossible to go to Bet Midrash and not learn something new. So tell me what happened. Probably there's something I want to learn. I would want to know. Shabbat shel mihaita. So they said, fine. So he started asking him questions. Shabbat shel mihaita. Whose week, whose Shabbat was this? Now, everyone here should relate to this question because we learned in Masechet Brachot of Kafchet the entire fascinating story of the forced resignation of Rabban Gamliel as the Nasi when he had an encounter with Rabbi Yehoshua of everyone, and he publicly humiliated him, not once, not twice, and the people said, enough is enough. We're going to fire Rabban Gamliel from being the Nasi. Who are we going to choose? Oh, we can't do Rabbi Yehoshua because he's the Baal Maaseh. We can't do Rabbi Akiva because he doesn't have Zchut Avot, right? So therefore, they decided to do Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who, even though that he was a young 18-year-old, he looked like 70 when they appointed him. Miraculously, he had the 18 shurot of white beard. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was rich. He was Asiri le Ezra. He was the 10th generation after Ezra Sofer. He was tremendous. He was fit for the job. They appointed him, and then Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Gamliel made up, and they said, "Okay, fine, we go back, but we can't, we can't have Rabbi Azariah completely put down. So we'll have two Nasis. For 3 weeks would be in every month. 3 weeks would be Rabbi Gamliel." And 1 week would be Rabbi Azariah. That's the backdrop of this question. Shabbat shel mi'aita. Whose week was this? Right? So they say, Shabbat shel Rabbi Azariah. Yes, correct. It was the 1 week in the month of Rabbi Elazar bar Azariah. That's the understanding of this Gemara. So it says Gemara, what did he darshan in Drush, in Haggadah? Amru lo beparashat Hakel. He darshaned about Parashat Hakel. Umat Rashba. What did he teach? Hakel et ha'am ha'anashim v'anashim v'ataf. Gather all the nation, men, women, and children. Im anashim ba'im lilmod, nashim ba'od lishmoa, taf lama ba'im. We understand that men come to learn, women come to listen. We have to understand what's the difference in hearing, learning, and listening. We're going to explain this. But the children, why are you bringing children? Little children? You bring little children for what? It's a shiur. Why would you bring little children to shiur? Says the Gemara, to give schar to people, to the parents who bring them. Amar lahem, he was so excited. You have to explain all this tomorrow or next year. Amar lahem, Margalito, you had such a jewel in your hands and you wanted to hide it from me. Why in the world would you not want to teach this to me? He said, he got so excited about this. Now we have to explain what's the excitement over here, right? And then he brings another drasha. So I think we're going to stop here for today, and we're going to pick this up as next year. There's a lot to be explained in this beautiful piece of Haggadah and the story that comes after it, Bezrat Hashem, in the days to come. Chazak Baruch.